It's, as I understand it, that sense that you get when you see a falling star, that moment of, right, where you're not really sure. The uncertainty comes in, right? It's fascinating. You want to see it again. But if one ever comes close enough to the Earth, I would imagine it's going to have a little bit of tremendum in it. If you've ever been in an automobile accident, am I the only one? I don't think so. Think about those moments, okay? Think about those moments. When you first started to lose control, or you first realized that you were not going to be able to get out of the way. What did you say? Did you say anything? Well, there's two or three things you might have said, right? Oh my God is the first one that comes to mind. There are several others that we probably should not say out loud today, all of which I think are trying to say the same thing. This cannot be happening. This is too low, right? And yet there is a fascination. The memory will return to that moment again and again and again. For me, 9/11 is an example of this. And I will never forget that day. I would imagine you would say the same thing. It's interesting as students, right? They were at a much younger age. And yet, still, they remember. And yet, as horrible as the day was, every year, if you notice, the videos come back around again. And so we're completely terrified by it and yet fascinated, even hypnotized by it. It's difficult not to go back there. That, I think, is something like the tension that you find in the Mysterium Tremendum and Fascinon. And it really, for me, it cuts right to the core, not just of religion and religious experience, but of life its own self. Because it's that moment when you are not sure. I mean, we just sort of skate through life all too often, don't we? Just take it for granted, when it's good. But then life is like that. Every once in a while, it's going to throw you that curveball that you did not see coming. And suddenly, what you assume to be true may not be anymore. Right? May not be anymore. Imagine living in a world where everything is alive. Is a rock alive? A stone? Isn't it just a rock? Depends on what you mean by alive, doesn't it? Does it breathe? Well, no. Not that we know of. But if you break it down to its most basic level, I mean, its elemental level, what is a rock made of? Same stuff that we are, thank you, absolutely, right? Molecules, let's say molecules, atoms. What is an atom? I love this. What is an atom made up of? Come on. Who paid attention? You got your neutron connected to your proton, and what's that electron doing? At an incredible rate of speed, right? In other words, that rock is vibrating. We just aren't perceptive enough to pick up on it, right? So it might well be alive, and I think in reality it is very much made up of the same stuff, if you will, that we are. Ancestor veneration is another characteristic that shows up. And oftentimes the term ancestor worship comes in, but I'm not really sure that this is worship, that the ancestors are considered to be gods, but rather as specially blessed and specially honored people. Do we honor our ancestors at all? Yeah.
I don't think we honor them as much as some other peoples that I've been around, say in South America or some of those areas.
That's true. That's true. But we don't live in the society we once did, right? It's not, that everybody, the whole big family living in one village, not so much, right? That nuclear family has shattered for us, right? Well, do we hold the elderly to be in high esteem and seek out their wisdom? No, not so much. Not so much. A discount, yeah. I guess it's better than nothing. I don't know. But among tribal peoples, you do see a great deal of attention being paid to one's forebears, right? There's a village on the island of Sulawesi where you can actually map the socioeconomic life and history of the village, because when a person passes away, they carve a statue and they place it with special rituals on that hillside, and you can see that they are placed, the higher up you are on the hillside, the higher up your family is in that society, right? It's actually a visual marker of the social life of those people. And I wonder if, how different that might be for us today as well. But another thing about the ancestors, by and large, primal peoples don't understand death the way that you and I do. When is somebody dead? In our culture, when is somebody dead? Well, when they stop breathing. What else? Their heart stops. What else? No brain activity, right? What happens if somebody dies but then is revived? If all three of those things have happened? Or we call it a miracle, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not sure even we know exactly the moment when. I can tell you the ritual moment of death in our culture, and that is when the doctor or the. Thank you. Yes, when some official actually signs the death certificate, then you are officially dead, right? In a ritual manner of speaking. But among many of these people, death is not. It's much more porous. It's much more porous, right? And it's interesting, our attitude toward death. Right? How long do you actually get to keep the body around when someone passes away? In our culture, what would you say is the average before that person is either into the ground or cremated? 3 to 5 months? 3 to 5 years? Days? 3 to 5? That's it? That's all we get. That's all we get.
And we have a sanitized version of death in America.
Well, talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I've read some interesting books, speaking off the back of people that know, not myself, but some cultures I've read where they actually, they're with the body for a few days. They're home.
Some beyond a few days, right? Some beyond. They seem to be somehow more comfortable with death than we. It's as if you use the term sanitize, as if we can't get them away from us fast enough. We have these, germs, right? The whole worry about cholera, the whole 9 yards, right? And of course the smell. But I think it might say something about our attitude toward death, which says something about our attitude toward life, right? But in many of these tribes, when you are dead, at least in our understanding, you are so not dead. Right? You're not dead yet. You're alive as long as your tribe remembers you. As long as your tribe remembers you, you still are very much alive. Oftentimes, they will set a place at the dinner table, right, for this loved one, because And it's not just symbolic, it's because they still are very much with them. Which I find to be quite fascinating.
That's not necessarily primary. Some religions also do the same thing.
And in terms of,
Buddhist or people in Southeast Asia, they put out food for spirits to come. It's not just primal religion.
yeah.
It's culture.
Well, it's definitely culture. It's definitely culture. And if you trace those practices back far enough, what you're going to find is that they have roots in what we might describe as a primal culture. But definitely, you're going to find different versions of this. And one of the things that we really should talk about, but I'm less qualified than one of my colleagues, is, for instance, in the United States, right, if we talk about Native Americans, how many of those Native Americans have actually been converted, if you will, to another religion? Or if you go to Southeast Asia, right, Hinduism has come in from the outside. Buddhism has come in from the outside, right? And what you find, it's one of the reasons why we talked last week about how incredibly complex each of the religious traditions is. I mean, if you're going to talk about Christianity, which one are you talking about? Or Buddhism, or Hinduism. Any religion, particularly religions that move, that grow, that spread, wherever they go, they're going to be blended with local customs. One thinks of the Dalai Lama and his version of Buddhism. Very different from what you will find in the birthplace of the Buddha, northeastern India, in part because as Buddhism left India, headed into China, and we'll talk more about this in a couple of weeks, it is rubbing elbows, if you will, with the local religious traditions and practices in the Himalayas. There's a local religion called Bon, B-O-N. And so you get a different version and a different version. And so by the time Buddhism gets to Japan, and you get Zen Buddhism, which is the most popular form in the United States today, it's different. And then when it crosses the Pacific and comes into the United States, it takes on a whole other characteristic. It looks different, it sounds different, and in many ways, it is different. But let me read a poem that I think is a good example of this attitude toward death and dying. And it comes from a tribe in Africa. Those who are dead are never gone. They are there in the thickening shadow. The dead are not under the earth. They are in the tree that rustles. They are in the wood that groans. They are in the water that runs. They are in the water that sleeps. They are in the hut. They are in the crowd. The dead are not dead. Those who are dead are never gone. They are in the breast of the woman. They are in the child who is wailing, and in the firebrand that flames. The dead are not under the earth. They are in the fire that is dying. They are in the grasses that weep. They are in the whimpering rocks. They are in the forest. They are in the house. The dead are not dead. Wow. One thing that we could talk about too, I suppose, is one of the lenses through which Native religions and cultures have been viewed is that somehow they are a current reflection of early humans, prehistoric humans. And that too is a very complex thing to think about, to talk about. I mean, to what extent is that true? not true. I mean, is there a tribe on the planet